So, you want to become a full-time worship leader. Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 ways to know if you've been called into full-time worship ministry. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below and let's get into it, because today we're talking about full-time worship leadership. And have you been called to full-time worship ministry? I remember my story of being called into full-time worship ministry, and a lot of these points that I'm going to share with you kind of come from experience, things that I saw in my journey. Just a little bit about me real quick. I started leading worship at the age of 13, and I joined the worship team. And then at the age of 16, they asked me to become the praise team coordinator at my church at the age of 16. And so I did that. And then I went to college for a year, got really involved with the campus ministry there, and then eventually moved back home and started going to Liberty University online, where I studied religion with a minor in biblical studies. And then from there, after I graduated, I had been leading worship all throughout that time at a church, at a local church plant with some people that I knew from growing up in my hometown. And when I graduated, I walked into my pastor's office and said, hey, I'm interested, I'm graduating here in a couple weeks, and when I graduate, it's my goal to be a worship leader, so I'd love for that to be here. And he's like, let me run some numbers. He came back to me a little bit later and said, let's make it happen. So that's my story of how I became a full-time worship pastor. Everybody's story is a little bit different, but wherever you are in the journey, I think that there are certain signs that point to whether God is calling you to be a full-time worship pastor, and that's what I want to share with you today. Before we get into that, though, I want to hear from you. Where are you at in this worship leading journey? Not that there's like a starting point and an ending point, but are you a volunteer worship leader? Are you a part-time worship leader, or are you a full-time worship leader? And I'm talking, of course, about being paid to lead worship at your church. Are you on staff at your church? Are you volunteer? Are you part-time? Are you full-time? Let us know in the comments below, and I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your answer down below. Let's get into 3 simple signs that you're being called into full-time worship ministry. Sign number 1 is this: you are faithfully serving where you are currently at. Are you faithfully serving where you are currently at? Not just serving, not serving begrudgingly, complaining about everything, about how you'll never be able to do everything that you need to do because you're not full-time, but are you faithfully serving where you are currently at? Because if you're not faithfully serving where you are currently at, God is not going to call you to the next season and be like, oh, you know what, you didn't really handle this little responsibility of just showing up on Sunday and playing guitar for your worship team very well. So here, I'm just going to give you this whole worship ministry of this other church. I don't think God works that way. I think God gives us small things, usually at first, that we prove to be faithful in. And then those small things lead to bigger things and bigger things and bigger things. So are you being faithful with where you're serving at right now? Are you serving anywhere? If you're not serving anywhere, go get plugged in somewhere and just enjoy the process. You know, being a full-time worship leader isn't all rainbows and sunshines, right? Like there's yes, it's cool. It's fun. I enjoy it. I look forward to doing it for hopefully the rest of my life. But just because you become full-time doesn't mean that those volunteer or part-time struggles go away. They actually just get expanded because people expect you to do more as a full-time worship leader. So be faithful where you're at right now. Just faithfully serve. And let's move on to number 2. The second way that you can know if God is calling you into full-time ministry is that other people affirm the calling on your life. Have people told you, hey, you're really good at this. Like, I recognize in you that you have the gifts to do this. Are people that you trust and not just people who are stroking your ego, telling you, you would be good at this. Or other worship leaders, like if you're serving under another worship leader, talk to them and say, like, let them know of your ambition, of your dream, and ask them, like, is this something that you see me doing in my life at some point? And that's how you know. Like, oftentimes God works through other people to encourage us and to affirm a calling on our lives, is by having these people come and say, man, like, I feel something whenever you lead worship. The way that you lead worship, I think that you'd be great in that role, or you are great in that role right now. And that can point you to, okay, maybe I'm being called to do this full time. And finally, number 3, the door is being opened for you to pursue it. The door is open for you to pursue full-time worship leading. God opens doors. Sometimes the doors are like just open a little bit, and we got to kind of throw our shoulder into it a little bit to get it to open up. But the door is there. Like, do you see the opportunity in front of you? Are you in a place relationally with your wife? Are you in a place financially with where you're at in life? Like, are these things lined up where the door is open for you to pursue this? And maybe they aren't, and God's going to work anyways, but usually there's some little speck of light out in the distance where you're like, okay, I can see this being a possibility. And then you take a step towards that light, and take a step towards it until you eventually reach the door, and you throw your shoulder into it, and the door explodes open, and now you're a full-time worship leader. God will provide the opportunities for you to become a full-time worship leader if you are called to be a full-time worship leader. Now, that doesn't mean that we just sit back passively and wait for it to happen. Carey Nieuwhof says this: God's in control, but you have a role. God wants you to take steps forward towards that. If he's placed it on your heart and that's a desire for you, then pursue it a little bit and see if those doors are open to you. And that's how you know. But if the doors are shut, and the doors are shut, and the doors are shut, and the doors are shut, then maybe it's just not the season for you to be a full-time worship leader right now. That's not what people want to hear. People want to hear, oh yeah, everybody is being called to full-time worship ministry. Well, if the opportunity isn't there and you've tried to honestly pursue it, and the doors just keep getting shut, it doesn't mean to give up. You can keep pursuing it, but just know in this season, you aren't being called to be a full-time worship leader. Maybe there's still some more work that God wants to do through you in your volunteer or your part-time worship ministry. So there you have it, 3 signs to know if you've been called to full-time worship leading. Bit of a shorter video today. Didn't have too much to say on it. Either you're serving where you're currently at, or you're not. Either other people affirm it in your life, or they don't. Either the door is open or the door is closed. That's how you know if you've been called to full-time worship ministry. God will line those things up in your life. While you're in the season of waiting to be called to full-time worship ministry, you can do a bunch of different things. You can work on improving your worship leading. And if you want to improve your worship leading, check out the link in the description below to the free audio training that I put together called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.